deadline, that time frame, was to expire tonight at midnight. You can see the outside of the Capitol. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer also working with Pat Toomey. And that discussion was on the Fed and then emergency lending. That was okay. It looks like Schumer is speaking live right now. Let's listen in.
But after a long and arduous year, after a year full of bad news, finally we have some good news to deliver to the American people. Make no mistake about it, this agreement is far from perfect, but it will deliver emergency relief to a nation in the throes of a genuine emergency. It should have the votes to pass the Senate, the House, and reach the president's desk to become law. We should make that happen as soon as possible, even tonight if we can. By all rights, a bill of this urgency should have passed months ago. The country needed it. But we all know what happened. The Republican majority caused more than 8 months of delay and gridlock. 20 members of the Senate majority wanted no money. And when the Republican leader simply forgets, for months he said, let's examine the crisis. Let's put it on pause, while Democrats were demanding more action. And then when he produced legislation, it didn't have what was needed and had poison pills. A provision that would give all corporations, no matter how egregious their behavior, immunity. And nothing to help the unemployed. No direct checks. So the idea that this delay was caused by Democrats is Alice in Wonderland history. It was caused by a Republican majority that didn't want to vote the monies desperately needed by the American people. The significance of this package, even though it's not as large or robust as it should not be underestimated. We will deliver the second largest federal stimulus in our nation's history. Only the CARES Act will have been bigger. Only the CARES Act, which I was proud to negotiate with Secretary Mnuchin. In size and scope, this bill will exceed the Recovery Act passed in the aftermath of the financial crisis. And once this federal relief bill is signed into law, Congress will have allocated well over $3 trillion in relief this year alone. And that is a historic figure to match a historic crisis. It will give the new president a boost, a head start as he prepares to right our ailing economy. The economy is in a deep, deep hole because of President Trump and the Republican Senate's failure to act in a timely manner. But this at least begins us getting the relief the American people need so that when President Biden takes over, he can do more and help us dig out of this deep hole. And the good news too, the poison pills that so stopped any progress put in by the majority leader are not in this bill. It won't include any provision to limit the legal rights of workers who are put in harm's way, or any provision to gratuitously limit the authority of the Fed. Now, it's remarkable how far we have come. As I mentioned earlier, this summer, the Republican leader admitted 20 members of his caucus didn't want to vote for another dime in COVID relief. Before negotiating with Democrats, the majority offered a package of $500 billion that contained poison pills designed to doom the thing from the start. That way, Republican senators wouldn't be forced to approve any new spending. Here at the end of the year, reason has prevailed, sweet reason, and will now deliver a package of almost $1 trillion. And that matters, not for any one party. It matters for the American people. Because we increased the size of this bill, expanded its reach, more Americans will receive assistance before the holidays. For Americans who have lost their jobs through no fault of their own, this bill will throw out a safety net. Initially, Republicans were ready to let enhanced unemployment benefits expire. They were ready to move on without help for renters. They opposed another round of direct payments. Their starting offer for UI and rent relief was 0, 0, and 0 again. But the good news that transcends any of the obstacles that we faced is that in the final agreement, we will extend all 3 federal unemployment programs created under CARES. We will provide $300 in weekly federal unemployment benefits for the next 10 weeks. For families struggling to make ends meet, this bill will cushion the blow. A new round of survival checks will soon be on the way. $600 per adult, another $600 for every dependent in the household. Many of us would have liked that to be higher, but at least this is the quickest way to get money into the pockets of the American people, sending their tax dollars right back where they came from. Of course, as I said, it's not as much as many Democrats and some Republicans would have liked. And we hope that next year, the same bipartisan support that emerged behind $1,200 stimulus checks will propel even more assistance to working families. For the first time ever during this pandemic, Congress will provide $25 billion in direct rental assistance to help reduce the burden on Americans who have fallen behind on the rent. We also extend a moratorium on evictions to give our fellow citizens more time to get back on their feet. For small business owners, we're providing businesses the opportunity to take another draw of the popular Paycheck Protection Program. Crucially, this bill will provide $12 billion for minority-owned and very small businesses who struggled to access financing during the earlier rounds of PPP. Local newspapers and local broadcasters will have access to this assistance. Nonprofits, I worked very hard to see that happened. And our nonprofit religious institutions, our churches and our synagogues and our mosques, no collection plate, no income, but so vital to social services and so needed during a time of crisis, will once again get the help they need, something that I authored in the CARES bill. I'm especially pleased that this bill will provide money for bars and restaurants and $15 billion in SBA grants for theater operators and small venue owners through the Save Our Stages Act. These venues are so important to my state and many states across the country. They're the lifeblood of our communities. They were first to close and will be the last to open. The bill gives them a fighting chance. And of course, today's agreement will give a major boost to our battle against the disease itself. There will be more than $30 billion to support the procurement and distribution of the coronavirus vaccine, ensuring it's free and rapidly distributed to everyone. Today's agreement includes this and all more: support for childcare, food assistance, agricultural relief, the Postal Service, and funding to help families gain access to broadband. So, the American people have a great deal to celebrate in this legislation, but of course, the agreement we reached is far from perfect. It leaves out state and local assistance, direct state and local assistance. Despite desperate pleas from governors, mayors, economists across the spectrum, Republicans stubbornly refuse to provide direct aid to state and local governments. Over 1 million employees, public employees, have already lost their jobs. It doesn't matter if you're working for a small business and get laid off, or if you're working for a government and laid off. You still need to feed your family. So why is there such a difference on this side of the aisle between these same people, flesh and blood? Because one works for a government, they don't get help. Because one works for a small business, they do. Both should get help. State revenues, of course, are significantly down across the country, in states red and blue. The continued opposition to state and local funding from Republicans remains deeply irresponsible. It will force states to make painful decisions to cut jobs, potentially raise taxes on working families. And it will hurt the economy of the entire country as millions more of government workers are laid off at a time when we're struggling to recover, hurting us all. Still, Democrats refuse to let state and local governments be completely left behind. Today's agreement does include aid for specific state-level expenses. $82 billion for education funding, $27 billion in payments for testing and state health care programs, $45 billion for transit systems. I'm very proud of the fact that New York's MTA will receive the money it needs to keep going. It is so vital to our city's economy and something I worked very hard for. Make no mistake, these funding sources are not a replacement for direct aid to state and local governments, and we Democrats will continue to fight for those in the new year. But in this case, a rose by any other name smells not quite as sweet, but at least it brings some relief. State and local governments will receive assistance in a number of different ways. Now, when this chamber gavels back in 2021, we must pick up where we just left off. We've given the administration a vital head start, but make no mistake about it, our economy is in a deep, deep, deep hole. In part because of the Trump administration's lack of policy in fighting the coronavirus. Now we will have to help them. This is a good start, but a lot more needs to be done. We must continue to protect people's jobs, whether they work for a company or a local government. We must do so much more. And we got to start building, stimulating our economy so it gets out of the hole with things like infrastructure and wiring every home with broadband and improving our healthcare and education systems and so much more, so much more. So let me be very, very clear about one thing. Once this deal is signed into law, it cannot be the final word on congressional relief. There is more to do in the new year with a new administration that has a much more favorable attitude towards giving the American people the help they need. The bipartisan agreement is simply a down payment. It will establish a floor, not a ceiling, for coronavirus relief in 2021. Mr. President, over the course of this challenging year, tens of millions of Americans have been pushed close to the breaking point. They've lost their jobs. They've lost their homes. Many can't feed their families. Many have lost neighbors, colleagues, friends, and family to this vicious, vicious disease. They have such great pain. Pain we can only distantly empathize with because it hasn't happened directly to us here. As the pandemic enters its worst phase, we will continue to be isolated from one another. But behind closed doors, desperation mounts for millions and millions of our fellow Americans. This bill is for them, to carry them to a brighter day.
Good evening, I'm Alicia Menendez. As we come on the air tonight, a live look at the Senate floor where Senators Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer announced a deal has been reached to keep the government funded and to send more COVID relief to the American people. Here's the Senate Majority Leader a short time ago.
At long last, we have the bipartisan breakthrough the country has needed. Now we need to promptly finalize text, avoid any last-minute obstacles, and cooperate to move this legislation through both chambers.
A deal reached, but still no clear answer on when it could become law. A quick reminder of why this is so urgent as Americans continue to break records in new daily COVID infections. If Congress doesn't pass this quickly, 30 million Americans will lose their homes when the federal evictions moratorium ends on January 31st. By then, nearly 12 million of our fellow citizens will be an average of $6,000 behind on rent and utilities. And despite so many livelihoods on the line, the president nowhere to be found in these negotiations, doing the job he's fighting so hard to keep, instead firing off tweets, attempting over and over and over again to argue he won the election. Just today, his campaign, through Rudy Giuliani, filed a petition asking the Supreme Court to reverse the outcome of Pennsylvania's election results. We begin with NBC News correspondent Leanne Caldwell on Capitol Hill. Leanne, this was very touch and go right about just until you came on air. What do we know about this deal?
Hey, Alicia. So it has been about 270 days since Congress last acted regarding COVID relief. That's when the CARES Act was passed. Now we're 5 days before Christmas on a Sunday night, and congressional leaders have announced finally that they have reached an agreement on about a $900 billion new COVID relief bill. So what sort of relief are Americans going to get? So unemployment is going to be extended, and the jobless will also receive an additional $300 a week in a federal unemployment benefit. Small businesses, there's going to be about $300 billion in small business loans. There's money for vaccine distribution as well. And of course, there's direct payments for those who are eligible at around $600 a person, and for children as well. Now, many lawmakers say that this is not enough. There are many on the right or on the left, and even some on the right who wanted something more, especially in those direct payments, want a much bigger bill. But Republican leaders and Democratic leaders are both saying that this is a bridge into the new year, with especially Democrats saying that more definitely needs to be done. So what happens now? Well, of course, the House and the Senate have to pass this legislation. But first, we also haven't seen bill text yet. We have just an announcement that a bill or that a deal hasn't been announced. So we are waiting for bill text. Then the House of Representatives will vote, and so will the Senate. But they are not going to do that tonight. They are going to hold over until tomorrow, where they will vote on these measures. But the government funding runs out at midnight tonight, so they are going to give themselves another one-day extension of government funding to give them some more time and more cover to get all of this done, Alicia.
And as of about 30 minutes ago, there were still 3 sticking points that we were hearing about, having to do with PPP, having to do with paid family leave. What happened in the past hour or so that we now saw McConnell and Schumer on the floor saying that a deal had been reached?
Yeah, that's sometimes how things happen. Things are stuck, and then finally it just lets loose. Some of those issues that were resolved were about the ability of small businesses to deduct their Paycheck Protection Program on their taxes. You know, members of Congress on the Republicans and Democrats were united on this issue, but Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin opposed this measure and made a last-minute stand. Well, he seemed to have backed down, and businesses will get to deduct their PPP loans. Other issues were about private school vouchers. We're still waiting to hear exactly how that was worked out. And then finally, Democrats, including House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, was trying to extend a paid COVID family relief program. I am told that was worked out in the sense that there was going to be a small tax credit instead. But we're still working to get the details on exactly how all of these things shaped up, Alicia.
All right, Leanne Caldwell on Capitol Hill for us tonight. Leanne, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, for more now, I want to turn on this bill, this relief bill, to Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal of Washington. She's the senior whip of the Democratic caucus. Congresswoman, your thoughts on this deal?
Well, I think the most important thing, Alicia, is that we are going to get relief to people, and it will come soon. This vote will likely be tomorrow. We'll vote on a CR, as you heard, tonight to give us a little bit more time. We still haven't seen the full text. But what I can say is that, you know, I chair the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and there was loud cries for direct relief, checks in people's pockets, money in people's pockets, unemployment assistance that is continued. Those things are in this bill where they weren't just 72 hours before. And that is because we took a very principled stand that this bill had to include that. It also very importantly includes $25 billion of rental assistance that will be available for renters and for those small mom and pop landlords. And that money can be used not only for rent, but also for utilities, for heat, all the things that people need in this moment. So that is a very important piece. There is also money for food stamps. There is an extension of the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit. These are things that are about helping people to weather just another couple of months as we get into a new administration. We're going to have to come back and do this again. But remember, when you look at the size of this, it's only for 3 months, and there is so much more that needs to be done. So I think, this is a hard one because we have been fighting for 9 months since the CARES Act passed for much, much more and for stability and certainty so that people aren't worrying every month about whether Congress is going to pass another package or not. This needs to be continuing. We wanted $2,000 a month in relief checks for people across this country. We didn't get that, but we did get something that will help tide people over.
Right. It's far short of that. I mean, the bill includes direct payments of $600 to qualifying Americans. I believe it's then an additional $600 for each dependent, unemployment insurance bonus of $300 a week. That's far short of the number that you were asking for, that other progressives were asking for. I know you agree it does not.
A drop in the bucket. A drop in the bucket. And this is supposed to be the art of the deal. I knew whenever all this stuff first broke out pertaining to the coronavirus that the communism-controlled states, financially speaking, not morally speaking, but financially speaking, was going to come out better than your open societies such as ourselves. Because there's so many people, especially here in America. I can't speak for New Zealand and Australia and all these other places, but here in America, people just want to sharpen the pencil right down to the very fine line towards, okay, how can we do this? How can we budget this in to the point that we won't be over, but we'll be right there at the line? And so many people does that. They don't leave no equation for a rainy day. And now this has turned into a stormy day. Not just a rainy day, but a stormy day. And to me, this is only a drop in the bucket. A literal drop in the bucket in comparison to how many bankruptcies and how many people are going to be financially strained at the end and the beginning part of 2021. It's horrible. That's the only way to describe it. It's absolutely horrible in what has happened here, to the point that the working class, the mid class, the poor class takes a hit like this, but the rich class continues to stay afloat. And to think that they're going to throw this off on the backs of the taxpayers pertaining to state government is just an insult to injury. Because now you're going to punish them again with their state taxes. I've just never seen anything this bizarre of it being but the perfect storm to disaster. A catastrophe. Apocalyptic. If they don't watch before it turns out. It's sad. Bad leadership starts at the top. It don't start at the bottom.
Meet the scale of the crisis. Where else do you believe that this deal, which I understand needed to get done, falls short?
Well, if you ask it that way, it falls short on just about every element, right? Because what we really need is a package that is somewhere around $3.5 to $4.5 trillion in the short term. And that's not what we have. But this allows us to just get through the next month or two. I would have liked to seen a lot more money in that rental assistance category, in housing assistance. I would have liked to see more money in child childcare, but there is a significant piece in here for childcare, but not enough. So I think you could go through all the way. You were talking about the paid family leave provision. We wanted that to be continued just as it was in the CARES Act. What ultimately is in there is just a small tax credit for employers who voluntarily decide to do this. That's not as good as what we had in the CARES Act. But again, it's an important, at least a little bit of a protection there. So I think across the board, we wanted to see a lot more. And at the end of the day, what we have to understand is the longer we deny people money in their pockets, the further down into a hole the economy goes. Now, one thing I just want to point out is that this does include stimulus or survival checks for people in mixed status families. So that was something that was not included in the CARES Act. That is a very good thing. And so we are excited about that, and we pushed very hard for that. So there are a few things in here that give us some hope. But most of all, I want to say to the people that are out there who are struggling, the people who can't put food on the table, the people who are worrying about where their next rent check is going to come from, that this will get you through the next month and a half. And then with a new administration, we've got to come back and do more. So hang in there. The federal government has got you. We've got your back. And we are finally, despite intransigence and cruelty from Republicans, going to get at least something done.
Before the coronavirus ever hit, and this is the gospel, this is the truth. Every year during the winter, you always hear of elderly couples having to sacrifice by either paying for their medication or doing without heat in the winter. And it's so unbalanced right now towards the richest of the rich versus the poorest of the poor, that I've said all along, if you don't default and quit paying out all this interest and start all over again, there's not going to be no future, no hope for the poor or the middle class to ever, ever, ever become the rich class, even though right now as I'm speaking, they claim that there is 2 millionaires that gets created every day in China. And it's been that way now for several years. 2 millionaires per day gets invented in China. And that's just China. That's just China alone. So prosperity's out there. Profit is out there. You just got to be with the right group of people, making the right product or investing in the right investment to be able to make this type of return. But by and large, when you look at America, and you look at how many people is losing their shirts right now, this is not going to be good. And a temporary Band-Aid towards kicking the can down the road is not going to be good. This is all a perfect storm that is brewing in regards towards a catastrophe. And I'm sure is tightly knit and grooved and sewed in as one nation is into another. If the American economy was to completely fail, it would devastate economies all over the world. All over the world. In other words, they would have to stop making t-shirts. They'd have to stop making tennis shoes. They'd have to stop making little gizmos and gadgets that the American people like. It's basically at a breaking point. And if the government is not there to pad the fall of its people, what are the survival rates of its people ever surviving this type of a calamity. Slim to none, or just none. Slim to none, or just none. It's bad. You know, the rich, they're going to take care of themselves. Thing about it is, this is going to be so effective on the mid class and the poor class, it's going to eventually affect them too as well.
As you well know, this was very touch and go. Yesterday, the story was Senator Pat Toomey holding things up. Today, the story was Steve Mnuchin injecting himself last minute into these talks. Can you sort of pull back the curtain for us and give us a sense of the role that Mnuchin was playing?
It's very difficult to know, when the White House is suddenly going to weigh in a productive way. I mean, the talks were going all the way, and then suddenly Mnuchin decides that he wants something, and luckily the Speaker held strong, Democrats held strong, and he did not get his way. These are important, last-minute things that hold up this package. That's why we're still here. And frankly, I'm glad that we're going to be voting on this tomorrow, because we need to look at all of the text and make sure that there aren't things that have been snuck in here that we don't know about. So that is very important. None of us have seen any text. It's still being written. There is still, discussion about how much money in the education, if any, in the education bucket is going to go to private schools, something that we want the money to go to our public schools. And so let's see what the final text is. But I can tell you that this has been a fight because Republicans have no sense of decency, no sense of compassion for people across this country who are just suffering. And just need us to step up and help them, as countries around the world have done. The United States of America doesn't suffer from scarcity. We suffer from greed. Poverty is a policy choice. Homelessness is a policy choice. Mass unemployment is a policy choice. And it's on us that we haven't been able to fix these things, and that we've been, just spiraling further and further into despair.
All right, Congressman Jayapal, thank you so much for your time. Meanwhile, today's other big breaking news, a second rollout is underway. The first shipments of Moderna's vaccine left its distribution site this morning. It's now the second vaccine approved for use in America. Also today, the CDC advisory panel voted to make frontline essential workers and persons 75 years and older next in line to receive vaccines. As for when a shot will be available to the general public, Admiral Brett Garrar, the White House testing czar, said today he expects every American should be able to get one by June. The president-elect's team, however, says it may take a little longer. Dr. Vivek Murthy, Biden's nominee for Surgeon General, tells my colleague Chuck Todd it may take until early fall to vaccinate the general population. Let's go to NBC's Shaquille Brewster outside Moderna's distribution site in Olive Branch, Mississippi. Good to see you, Shaq. Tell me, what is the latest there?
Well, Alicia, we saw several trucks roll out of the facility behind me today, and the bottom line is that the Moderna vaccine, the second vaccine approved by the FDA to help fight the coronavirus, is en route to Americans. It's going to all 50 states. We expect deliveries, those first deliveries, to start arriving tomorrow. It was really this morning that we saw the supply chain process really play out in real time with cameras. We saw workers go into the big freezer room and essentially break down Moderna's stockpile of vaccinations into individual shipments. Those boxes were then emptied with or placed with cooling packs, and those boxes then put on FedEx trucks here in the Memphis area and UPS trucks in the Louisville area. And now we know, according to the shipping providers, these are essentially priority overnight shipments. So those first shipments will arrive across the country starting on Monday, meaning that for some providers, that vaccination can start just early this week. What we know, and the reason why this event and this day has been celebrated, is because Moderna's vaccine is much different, or is similar in structure to Pfizer's vaccine, but it is different in the supply chain to Pfizer's vaccine. It doesn't require those subarctic freezers. It's more of an industry standard temperature that it can be cooled at. What that means is that you'll see this vaccine go to more places more quickly. You'll see them at pharmacies, nursing homes, for example. This is going to touch so many more people compared to that first round that we saw from Pfizer's vaccine. And also, when you listen to the leadership of Operation Warp Speed, there were some hiccups with Pfizer's rollout last week. Certain states didn't get the allocations that they were expecting. Well, the chief operating officer of Operation Warp Speed says those problems have now been solved, that they are ready for this next phase of the rollout. We expect about 6 million of Moderna's vaccines to roll out just this week. When you combine that with what we're expecting from Pfizer, this week we'll have a total of 8 million doses. Moderna is promising that number to be 20 million doses by the end of this year. Alicia?
So, Shaq, of course, there are all of the questions that you just answered about how this vaccine is actually going to get to people. And then there are the big questions about who is going to have access to these vaccines first. So I want you to talk me through these new CDC guidelines. Why are they so notable?
They're notable because what we know right now, we are in phase 1 of this national vaccination effort. There's a priority list, essentially, because there are, frankly, not enough vaccines for the 300 million some odd Americans in this country. So the CDC has detailed who gets the vaccine first and who should have access to the vaccine first. We know that in this first wave called 1A, phase 1A, we know that frontline coronavirus healthcare workers are at the front of the line. The people interacting with COVID patients each and every day, they're the first ones to get access to this vaccine. Next in line, you have people in long-term healthcare facilities, long-term care facilities, people in nursing homes, for example. That nursing homes have been such a vulnerable location, especially when you look at the coronavirus death rate. Those folks are going to be in line. Well, the CDC's guidelines later today now put seniors, people who are 65 and older, next in line, and then frontline workers, people who are interacting with individuals each and every day, people like firefighters, police officers. It establishes the order that will receive that people will receive this vaccine. The reason why it's important that it's timed with today is because when you look at the production, we are now scaling up to a period where we're going to see about 10 million vaccine doses being available to people each week, and that's only going to get quicker in the next coming weeks. So the idea is we have a clear sense of who is in line for those vaccines once they are available.
All right, Shaquille Brewster, thanks so much. Vaccines are on the way, but we need to get through the winter surge first. And despite being warned not to travel, more than 2 million people just passed through TSA checkpoints over the weekend. I want to show you something. Look at these lines of travelers in London. The UK just imposed a new lockdown for 21 million people there to fight a new strain of coronavirus. Crowds jammed train stations, rushing to leave before the new restrictions took effect. MSNBC correspondent Scott Cohen has been all over this story in San Francisco. Scott, good to see you. The number of cases jumped even faster after Thanksgiving. Any sign people are taking it more seriously now?
It's a bit of a mixed picture, Alicia. Here at SFO, this is the nation's 7th busiest airport. It's actually been fairly quiet. They say that they're looking at about a quarter of their normal travel. So on a day like today, the Sunday before Christmas, they would normally process about 80,000 passengers. It's more likely to be about 20,000. So that is a positive sign, at least in terms of people heeding some of the advice that it should be essential travel only. But as you alluded to, the TSA says nationwide, Friday and Saturday, they exceeded 1 million passengers a day, again, nationwide for the first time since the pandemic began. What the CDC is saying is that if you are going to travel, if you're still mulling whether to get on a plane or even get into your car this coming week for Christmas, ask yourself a series of questions. First of all, are you or your family, the people that you are visiting, at any sort of increased risk because of age, because of pre-existing conditions, and so on? What's the case level at your destination? Are the cases particularly high? Do you really want to be going there? Are hospitals overwhelmed where you are? We know they certainly are here in California. Are there local travel restrictions? Here in California, if you arrive in the Bay Area, for example, you are mandated to quarantine for 10 days. Have you had contact with people outside your household, whether they were infected or not, over the last 14 days? And are you traveling by bus, train, or plane where it's difficult to social distance? They say if you've answered yes to any of those questions, you really should give it another thought. And again, here at SFO, it does appear that people may be heeding that because the traffic level is so low, but it's a tough call as we head into Christmas.
Question, Todd, how many more travelers are we expecting to see before Christmas and New Year's?
You know, it's really difficult to say. You saw the long lines in places like London. We know that a lot of people are deciding after having weighed the risk that it is okay to make that trip. Here at SFO, they say forecasting this holiday season is really next to impossible.
I can believe that.
Typically, every holiday season, we publish a forecast of how many people we think are going to pass through our airport. There's so much uncertainty right now, we're not even venturing a guess at it. Normally, at this time of year, we would be talking to airlines about next Christmas, next holiday season. Right now, we're talking about next week or next month. That's how tentative air travel is right now.
And as a result of that, here, for example, there are a good 3/4 of the people who work in this airport on furlough, which gives you a sense of the economic impact as they try and gauge what's going to happen. Alicia?
All right, Scott Cohen for us in San Francisco. Thank you so much, Scott. Next, more on the deal just reached on Capitol Hill. It not only keeps the federal government running, but will also send much needed COVID relief to millions. Here's Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer a short time ago.
Good luck to all of us. As the Windmill Ministries always ends its message by telling its viewers, good luck to all of us, and shalom.